Okay, so doing another video here. Mainly, I commented about this in the original second oil change video. I'm doing another video just for the algorithm, so I'll pick it up so new people will actually get this. So I actually just drained a whole quart of oil out of the engine. That's because I screwed that up, actually. So filled the car with 5.5 quarts of oil, drove it home. Everything looked a little bit fine. Maybe the exhaust was, in hindsight, maybe a little more smoky than I expected. I thought it was just the weather. I think I might be remembering a cold start, or I'm forgetting even at this point. Regardless, like, I overfilled the engine basically. I didn't realize that. That's not good. And that's because I put in 5.5 quarts of oil, because the manual says it holds 5.5 quarts of oil, which is fine, but you do want to trust the dipstick. This is the first car I've been really doing oil changes on, so I'm kind of a noob at this. I know in my way around the car, I just haven't really maintained said car. I've worked on other vehicles where you take apart the engine a little more often. But anyhow, went home, checked the dipstick. Dipstick reported high. It was about maybe 20% overfilled according to the dipstick. Well, as far as how far the dipstick goes, 20%. Well, I mean, the dipstick doesn't read right down at 0. Let me see if I can remember. It was maybe a half a centimeter high as far as oil goes above the F line. So it was reporting overfilled basically. I thought that, I didn't know whether that was real or not. I was like, maybe dipstick from Veloster or something, or I don't know what the system is within Veloster. So that was kind of weird. I actually went and bought access to the service manual. You can get access to that. It's called a site called HyundaiTechInfo.com. Anyone can get access to that. It's behind a paywall, so you have to pay $40 for 2 weeks of access to the thing, or $60 for a month. I went for the month, and that is the literal service manual for the car. That's the actual legit one. You actually will also see a couple of notifications about things from Hyundai about they won't warranty this or do this, modify this a little bit, which is kind of nice. But that is the actual service manual for the car basically. I got access because I was trying to figure out how to take out the trunk brace. I figured I'd look up other things, verify the torque spec on the rear motor mount, and also maybe just check oil at the same time. And when I checked oil, I was kind of surprised to notice that yes, the amount of oil inside the engine is 5.45 ounces, quarts. 5.45 quarts, which lines up with the manual. However, they mentioned for an oil change, you put 4.57, which makes sense. Corey on the Elantra forum, Facebook kind of mentioned this, and that makes sense. Absolutely. Because the whole system, if you were to build the engine, like you mentioned, yeah, it's going to hold 5.45. That's how much you would put in. That's because, obviously the oil is going to be sitting in, after you run the engine for a while, that extra quart of oil is going to make its way into the high pressure oil system, low pressure oil, feed lines, basically everywhere else inside the engine. So when you drain the oil completely out of the engine, obviously that quart isn't going to fall out. There's no way to drain it out of the high pressure oil system. There's really no way to drain it. You can flush it, but you can't get the oil that's sitting in all those little micro channels, literally blood vessels effectively within the engine. You're not going to be able to drain that out. So that makes sense. So the actual spec for an oil change is 4.57, basically 4.5 quarts. And that'll get you to the point where the dipstick will read accurately, and it will read you're full. So drained a quart out of the engine, and I'm just kind of dialing it in right now since it's about a quart that I think I dumped out. I mean, obviously it's going to get a little weird taking a drain plug out, trying to put it in exactly at the right time. So I'm just shy of full right now, so I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, I figured I'd do the video just to put that out there. And it says 5.5. You've never done an oil change before, trust the dipstick. That's actually real. Yeah, I'm used to I'm running an engine in college, beating the crap out of it, do an oil change right then and there, and we made our own oil pan, so we just usually just use it. I would imagine they just used a combination of knowing how big the oil pan is, probably reading the dipstick, some other stuff. I just never really maintained my own car and had to think about stuff like that before. So good thing to know. About 4.5 is pretty much where you need to actually do the oil changes on this thing. And on the service manual, they mentioned specifically filter change and drain the oil pan, put in 4.57. I think that was pretty much the verbiage that they used. The pan holds 4.2, and there'll be about an extra 0.3, I guess, that'll kind of come out of the system when you take the filter out, and then the rest slightly above the pan, I guess. So other aside, the reasons why you don't want to run too much oil, why that's actually legitimately a bad problem if you're overfilled, is because this is obviously a wet sump system. What that means is that you have an actual oil pan. That's where all the oil is sitting, and the high pressure oil pump is inside the pan, and it's going to be feeding oil and pressurizing it, grabbing stuff from the pan underneath it and feeding into the rest of the car. This opposed to a dry sump, if you've heard of that. So what a dry sump system means is that you don't have an oil pan that's got quarts of oil in it. Instead, you have a really tiny oil pan that feeds out to a container on the outside with a pump, and that will pressurize into the engine. The benefits of like a dry sump system is if you corner really hard, you won't have an issue where the oil might slosh to the back of the engine. Granted, that's not a problem really in this car. I've never heard of it being a problem in the Velosters. So I don't think that's an issue in this car, because people have been throwing these around the Sonoma, obviously, in all those videos. So I don't think dry sump is necessary for this vehicle. But the problem with running too much oil in a sump system like this, obviously, though, is that oil is going to rise way up, basically, into the crankcase. And if that happens, if the oil level is really high, gets into the crankcase, what can happen is, as the engine is moving, it's bathed in oil more than it should be. It'll start creating froth. And a problem if your oil gets too frothy is that it's possible the high pressure oil pump will take a gulp of that froth. It'll take a gulp of air. That's not good. You don't want air getting into the high pressure oil system, because those channels there's a gap of air within the high pressure oil system, and that means whatever's next to it that's supposed to be getting that oil is going to miss that oil for that brief moment. If it gets really frothy, then you're not oiling what you need to be oiling, which is really bad for the engine. So something to kind of note. If it was only slightly overfilled, probably not that big of a deal, but I filled like a whole quart over, which is kind of a big deal. So pulled that out, and just to be on the safe side, basically. If you're not driving the engine hard, maybe you can get away with it. But people are going to be driving these engines hard, obviously, so that becomes a legitimate risk if you overfill. So I want to put that out there. So 4.5 is kind of where I would kind of hover over. I mean, just verify, actually check your dipstick over. Don't just blindly do it. I'm a little paranoid, so maybe that was good on my part. But yeah.